The gala froze mid-laughter the moment the wine hit his suit, a full glass. Crashing down Elijah Carter's chest, dark red spilling across deep navy like a wound opening in slow motion. Gasps. Then the laughter resumed, cruel, echoing, sharpened by chandeliers that glittered like judgment. The millionaire's wife held the empty glass above him, smirking. "Oops," she said, loud enough for every guest to hear. Guess cheap suits absorb better. Her friends howled. Phones lifted. Someone whispered, "What a pathetic fool." Elijah didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply wiped one sleeve, looked her in the eye, and smiled. Then, calmly, almost softly, he lifted his phone. "Yeah," he said into the receiver. "Go ahead. Cancel the contract. A $1.5 billion earthquake, set in motion with one quiet sentence." Long before the wine stained his suit, Elijah Carter had learned the power of silence. He arrived at the gala alone, stepping out of a modest black sedan that looked painfully out of place beside the guests' Ferraris and Bentleys. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no visible signs of power, just a broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit, carrying the weight of an empire quietly. Most guests didn't recognize him. They saw a face they didn't know, and a skin tone they dismissed before asking a single question. But behind that calm expression was the same boy who once walked 5 miles to school because buses refused to stop in his neighborhood. The same teenager who studied by candlelight when the power company cut electricity to the poor blocks. The same young man who built his first tech prototype in a garage that leaked every time it rained. His company, Carter Dynamics, now powered governments, satellites, hospitals, and global trade. 40,000 employees depended on his decisions. 9 countries sought his consulting. And tonight's hosting company was praying, begging, for his signature on a $1.5 partnership that would save them from collapse. But Elijah didn't come to be worshipped. He came to observe who people became when they thought he was no one. Minutes before the humiliation, Elijah had reviewed the merger file on his phone. A clean, elegant document worth $1.5 billion, one signature from him, and the hosting company would survive another decade. One refusal, and their stock would crater by sunrise. Executives hovered anxiously all evening, whispering, "Is he ready to approve?" He hasn't signed yet, and now, their fate balanced on a single insult. Hours before the gala turned poisonous, Elijah had quietly revealed the kind of man he truly was. He'd stopped outside the hotel entrance when he spotted a young server struggling with a toppled crate of glassware. Guests in designer suits walked past her, annoyed by the inconvenience. Someone even muttered, "Staff should be more careful." Elijah knelt beside her without hesitation. "Easy," he said gently, helping her gather each shattered piece. The girl trembled, terrified of being blamed. "My supervisor. He hates accidents," she whispered. Elijah smiled. "Accidents don't define people. Responses do." She didn't know she was speaking to the man about to decide her entire company's future. She only knew a stranger treated her with dignity. Later, inside the ballroom, Elijah paused by a portrait of his mother, the woman who worked 3 jobs, who stood tall even when the world tried to crush her pride. She used to say, "Strength isn't loud, baby. It's steady, it's patient, it's knowing you don't have to hurt someone to prove you belong." He carried her voice with him that night, and it was that voice that kept him calm. Even when the wine hit, Elijah hadn't planned to stay undercover until he heard the whispers. Near the ballroom bar, 2 executives complained loudly about unqualified diversity hires. Someone joked that the company's new mentorship program was charity work. Another bragged he could spot people who don't belong just by their clothes. None of them recognized the billionaire standing 3 feet away. Then Elijah overheard the most revealing voice of all, the millionaire's wife, laughing, mocking staff, bragging about humiliating a young intern earlier because people need reminders of their place. That was the moment Elijah decided. No introductions. No title. Tonight he wouldn't show them who he was. He would let them show him who they were. Elijah moved through the ballroom slowly, feeling eyes track him, confusion from some, quiet disdain from others. Servers rushed past, terrified of making mistakes. Guests lounged in glittering clusters, sipping arrogance like champagne. At the far table, the millionaire's wife watched him, smirking, whispering. Already choosing her next target, she drifted toward him like a queen approaching a peasant. Red dress sweeping, diamonds flashing, confidence sharpened to a blade. "Who let that in here?" she murmured to her circle. Laughter rippled behind manicured hands. Her husband joined her, lips curled. Two predators. Zero hesitation. And Elijah standing calm in the crosshairs, already knowing exactly how this night would end. The ballroom glowed with warm amber light, but beneath its elegance pulsed something colder. Something Elijah felt the moment he took another step toward his assigned table. It wasn't the music. It wasn't the clinking glassware or the polished accents floating through the room. It was the shift, the subtle tightening of shoulders, the way conversations dipped, then resumed with artificial brightness. The tiny, almost imperceptible glances aimed his way, curiosity, annoyance, judgment disguised as indifference. He'd lived long enough to recognize these social microcurrents, places where wealth became permission, places where class masqueraded as character, places where a man who didn't fit the script became a symbol rather than a guest. A cluster of executives parted slightly as he approached. Not enough to be polite, just enough to avoid brushing against him. One whispered, "New caterer?" Another muttered, "Definitely staff." Elijah kept walking. His suit, hand-stitched, Italian, subtle but exquisite, wasn't loud enough for people conditioned to equate wealth with flash. He'd chosen it deliberately. Understated, elegant. A suit meant for someone who didn't need to prove anything. But tonight, that subtlety cloaked him completely. He reached the table indicated on his card. Table 32, the farthest one from the stage. Behind a pillar, near the service exit, practically in the shadows, a table assigned to castaways, low-priority guests, and filler invitees meant only to make the room look full. A table that told a story without speaking. Elijah pulled out his chair just as two servers rushed behind him, carrying trays of champagne flutes. Their footsteps faltered when they realized who he was. Well, who they assumed he was. "Oh, sir, actually. This section is for guests only," one stammered, eyes wide with fear. The other whispered urgently, "Just let him sit, we'll get in trouble." Elijah gave them both a calm nod. "It's all right. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." They hurried off, confused. A woman at the next table leaned toward her friend and stage whispered, "Why don't they seat people with their own group?" Her friend giggled. "Maybe they needed diversity for the photos." More laughter. Elijah breathed in slowly, letting their words pass through him like smoke. He didn't internalize their ignorance. He simply observed it, cataloged it, filed it with every other detail he'd gathered since stepping inside. He hadn't mastered billions by losing his temper. He'd mastered billions by reading people, by understanding behavior, by watching who someone became when they believed no one important was looking, and tonight, no one thought he was important. The music softened as a spotlight swept across the room, illuminating the stage where the millionaire and his wife stood ready to give their welcome speech. The crowd applauded. She soaked in the attention like sunlight. Her eyes scanned the room drunkenly. Pausing when they found him again, her lips curved. Not with recognition, but with something between amusement and superiority, she nudged her husband. "Look, table 32. He followed her gaze, scoffed, and shook his head. "Probably snuck in," he murmured. Elijah said nothing. He sat still. Back straight, expression composed, but inside him, quietly, steadily, gears were turning, because he recognized the symbol embroidered on the stage backdrop. The silver crest of Ashford Holdings, the multinational group desperate for the $1.5 billion contract Carter Dynamics controlled. He also recognized the husband, Robert Ashford, the fourth-generation chairman trying to save a sinking empire with outdated strategies and inflated pride. Robert didn't realize the man he'd just dismissed was the only person capable of rescuing his company, the only one who could approve or destroy the merger, and his wife, the one who would soon throw wine on Elijah, was about to play a far bigger role in her husband's downfall than she could ever imagine. For now, though the ballroom continued celebrating them, clapping, cheering, wine glasses raised high, every guest saw glitz, glitter, and power. Elijah saw a company rotting from the inside, a leadership insulated by privilege, a culture where disrespect flowed downward unchecked. He watched the millionaire's wife deliver her speech with theatrical charm, pretending to care about charitable causes, diversity, and opportunity for all. Each sentence felt like an insult wrapped in velvet. Her audience ate it up. Elijah sat alone at his shadowed table, silent, absorbing every detail, as the gala moved toward the moment that would expose everything. He didn't know it then, but the humiliation she would unleash next would eventually become the blow that shattered a $1.5 billion empire. The moment the speeches ended, the millionaire's wife swept off the stage, glowing with praise, floating on applause, and made a beeline straight toward table 32. Her heels clicked like tiny hammers of judgment. Guests shifted, instinctively clearing her path. She loved that. The way people moved when she approached, like waves parting for royalty. She stopped behind Elijah, tilted her head, and said loudly, "Oh dear." Did someone lose their server? Laughter rippled. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut. Elijah didn't react. He simply folded his napkin calmly, placing it beside his untouched plate. Her smile thinned. She lifted a crystal wine glass from a nearby guest, swirling it thoughtfully. "You know," she mused, voice dripping with honeyed venom, "people really should stay in the sections assigned to them. It keeps the event balanced." Her friends leaned in, waiting for the joke, waiting for the cruelty. Then, with theatrical clumsiness, she stumbled forward. The wine arced through the air, a ruby-red ribbon, and crashed against Elijah's suit with a splash so loud it seemed to silence the room. Gasps, giggles, phones rising. "Oh my," she exclaimed dramatically. "So sorry. Must have tripped." Her friends howled. A server rushed in to help, but the millionaire's wife blocked her with a raised hand. "No, no. Let him clean it himself. He's used to it." Elijah lifted his eyes, calm as winter steel, and for the first time, the laughter faltered. The ballroom's glittering ceiling reflected every stunned face as Elijah calmly dabbed the spilled wine from his suit. No anger, no outburst. Just quiet control that made the millionaire's wife grit her teeth. She had expected humiliation, submission, apology. What she got instead was dignity, and that enraged her. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a poisonous whisper only a few nearby tables could hear. You people never learn your place, do you? A few guests froze mid-sip. A few turned away. Most pretended they heard nothing. The orchestra in the corner shifted awkwardly, violins hanging in silence like they were afraid to play. Elijah looked at her slowly, not with fear, but with a patience that felt like judgment, that only pushed her to go further. "So let me make it easy for you," she said, tapping his wine-soaked chest with a manicured finger. "Stand up, move, leave this table before security does it for you." Her husband watched from across the room, oblivious, locked in a conversation with investors who hung on his every syllable. She loved that he wasn't watching. It meant she could be herself. A couple at the next table whispered, "Isn't that the CEO she keeps bragging about insulting last year?" "No, this one looks too calm." Another guest reached for their phone, recording discreetly behind a menu. The millionaire's wife raised her voice. "Everyone here paid thousands for a refined evening, and you show up like some charity project who slipped past the door." Elijah finally spoke, soft, steady, heavy. "Ma'am, this hostility says more about you than it does about me." Her eyes widened, insulted that he dared speak back. "You think you're special?" she snapped. "You're exactly where you belong, on the receiving end of my generosity." A chair slid back. Someone stood. The movement sliced through the tension like a blade. James Whitford, a quietly wealthy philanthropist in a gray suit, stepped forward, face cold, eyes fixed on the wife like a man who had finally seen enough. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "you will stop speaking to him that way." She blinked, startled. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are?" James held up a hand. I said, "Stop." The ballroom quieted even more. Music stilled. Servers halted mid-step. Guests leaned in. James continued, "You've insulted him, degraded him, and assaulted him. This isn't arrogance anymore. This is cruelty. And it ends now," she scoffed, trying to gather her confidence. "My husband owns half the companies in this room. What exactly do you think you can do?" James glanced at Elijah, then back at her, and said a sentence that made the entire ballroom inhale at once. "Do you really want to find out?" The millionaire's wife let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "The kind people use when they don't yet realize the ground beneath them is cracking." "You?" she scoffed. "You think you can threaten me? Do you even know who my husband is?" James didn't blink. "I know exactly who he is," he replied, "but I also know who he is." He nodded toward Elijah. "And that's why I'm standing here." Uneasy murmurs rippled across the ballroom. The guests were no longer pretending not to watch. No phones were hidden anymore. They were recording openly. The wife's smile faltered. "Enough theatrics," she snapped. "Security!" Two large security guards began moving through the crowd, parting guests like heavy machinery. Elijah stayed seated, calm, steady, unshaken. And that calmness unsettled her more than anything else. James took one step forward, placing himself between Elijah and the guards. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "And you," she hissed, pointing at Elijah, "should have walked away when I told you." "But you people never—" A voice interrupted her, not loud, not angry, just authoritative enough to freeze the room. "That's enough." The crowd split instinctively. A woman stepped forward, elegant, composed with quiet power radiating from her like a second skin. Board members straightened. Executives cleared their throats. Servers stepped aside. She wasn't famous to the public, but everyone who mattered in that room knew her. It was Maria Langford, international art dealer, philanthropist, co-owner of the entire gala event, and the one person in the building whose name held more weight than the millionaire's husband. Maria's heels clicked sharply as she approached, her eyes fixed on the wife with surgical precision. "I've watched you insult this man," she said, I've watched you spill wine on him, berate him, demean him, and now call for security like he's a threat, a beat. But here's the truth. She turned slightly, just enough for the cameras to catch her profile, just enough for the wife to see the shift in the crowd. You have no authority to remove him. The millionaire's wife stiffened, confused. Why not? She demanded. Maria slowly pointed to Elijah. Because the man you've been humiliating for the last 10 minutes. The entire ballroom held its breath. Is one of the event's principal sponsors. The wife's jaw dropped, and the room erupted in gasps. The millionaire's wife staggered backward, like the ground itself had betrayed her. Sponsor? She whispered, eyes darting from Elijah to Maria, to the cameras that were still rolling. Maria folded her arms. Yes. His foundation covered nearly a third of tonight's charity fund. Gasps. Phones rising again. Servers whispering. Security freezing mid-step. The wife's confidence evaporated in real time. But then, James stepped beside Maria, voice steady. And now that everyone finally knows who he is, we're going to address what you did. A ripple of dread crossed the wife's face. Maria leaned in slightly. You have one chance, she said softly. Apologize. Properly. Here. Now. The wife's throat tightened. Hundreds of eyes pinned her in place, and the live-stream chat exploded as the countdown began. The millionaire's wife stood frozen, eyes wide, chest tightening, fingers trembling like she had been thrust under a spotlight she never expected. An apology? Here, in front of everyone? Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again. No words came. Maria studied her face with the calm precision of someone who had handled billion-dollar negotiations. And liars of every caliber. Interesting, Maria murmured. You had no trouble shouting insults. No trouble splashing wine. No trouble calling security. She tilted her head. But now you can't form a single sentence? A murmur spread through the crowd, low, judgmental, gathering force. James crossed his arms. Elijah didn't confront you. He didn't provoke you. He didn't disrespect you. You walked across this ballroom to attack him. The wife swallowed hard, eyes darting at the cameras recording from 3 angles. You're twisting this, she stammered. I wasn't, but then, a voice rose from behind the dessert station. I saw everything, everyone, turned. It was a young server, maybe 19, shaking slightly but forcing himself to speak. She pushed past me, he said. She demanded I move so she could teach him a lesson. He clenched his hands. I was scared to say anything. But I can't stay quiet now. Another server stepped forward. Then another. A woman from the catering team pointed at the wife, anger sharp in her eyes. She's done this before, she said. She threw a plate at one of our dishwashers last year, said he walked too loudly. Management covered it up. Gasps rippled, the wife's face drained of color. That's a lie, she spat. But a man from the lighting crew raised his hand. No, I remember that night. I helped clean it up. A security guard, one of the same men she had summoned moments ago, shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, he said quietly, we've filed 3 separate incident reports about you. All marked incomplete, or buried. The whispers sharpened like knives. Maria turned slowly toward the security guard. Thank you for your honesty. Then she faced the wife again, eyes cold and unflinching. So this isn't a one-time lapse, she said. This is a pattern. The wife shook her head vigorously. You people don't understand. He looked like he didn't belong. Silence. Not one person breathed. James stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. And what exactly does look like he didn't belong mean to you? She froze. Because there was no innocent answer. Elijah remained seated, silent. But the quiet strength in his posture made her panic tremble even more violently. Maria pointed at the cameras again, where thousands were watching the live stream in real time. You have humiliated a donor, attacked a guest, insulted staff, and exposed a long history of abusive behavior. Her voice hardened. If you want even a shred of dignity left, speak. The wife shook, tears beginning to form, but not from remorse, from fear. Fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of the world finally seeing who she was. But Maria wasn't finished. She gestured toward the wall of cameras. Because the longer you stay silent, the louder the truth becomes. The wife's breath quickened. The room felt smaller, hotter, tighter. Her world, once untouchable, was collapsing in slow motion, and everyone could see it. The millionaire's wife stood trembling, mascara smudging at the corners of her eyes. But still she said nothing. Not remorse, not accountability, just silence carved by fear. Maria took a slow breath, then stepped closer. Close enough that the wife could feel the weight of every word. You know, Maria began softly, we all make mistakes, even terrible ones. A pause. But there is a difference between a mistake and a pattern of cruelty. The wife blinked rapidly, her throat constricting. Maria reached for the event program on a nearby table, opening it to the front page. Her voice echoed through the ballroom. Tonight's gala celebrates compassion, dignity, and equality for all. She shut the booklet. And yet you, someone who signed the guest oath when entering, have broken every principle in it. James stepped beside her, tone calm but cutting. You swore to treat guests and staff with respect. You swore to uphold the values of the foundation. You swore to protect the dignity of every person in this room. He glanced at Elijah. And instead, you tried to strip someone of theirs. The wife shook her head weakly. I didn't mean... Maria raised a hand. Intent does not excuse harm. A wave of murmurs rolled across the crowd. Servers, guests, executives, security. Every face reflected one truth. They'd all seen it. They'd all heard it. They all knew exactly what she meant. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more force than any shout. Tell me, when did you decide that status made you superior? The wife's knees wobbled. When did you decide that dignity belonged only to people who looked like you? Her breathing quickened. When did you forget that the measure of a person is how they treat those they cannot benefit from? The ballroom fell so silent even the chandeliers seemed to listen. Maria stepped back. Tonight? You taught this entire room what entitlement looks like. She pointed toward Elijah. But he showed us what dignity looks like. The wife collapsed into a chair, trembling. The moral verdict delivered, and the world watching. The millionaire's wife clung to the edge of the chair. Fingers white, breath sharp, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Moments ago, she ruled the room. Now she couldn't command the attention of a single soul. Maria stepped aside. James folded his arms, and slowly, deliberately, Elijah stood, not to confront her, not to threaten her, simply to exist in the space she had tried to shrink him into. The shift was seismic, where she had stood towering over him. Now he stood calm, steady, upright, and she was the one looking up. A full, silent reversal. Gasps rippled as James pulled a chair from the main table and placed it directly across from her. But this time, he motioned for Elijah to sit at the sponsor's seat. the seat reserved for the most important figure at the event. Elijah hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair with quiet composure. Phones lifted, 1,000 flashes fired. The symbolism was unmistakable. Across from him, the wife's chair seemed to shrink beneath her weight, the coldest, smallest seat in the room. Maria nodded toward the cameras. "For the record," she said, "this is not punishment. This is clarity." She faced the crowd. For years, this woman has used status as a weapon. Tonight, she believed she could humiliate a stranger without consequence. Her gaze slid to the wife. But it turns out, she attempted to humiliate the wrong man. The wife's lips quivered. "Please, stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," James replied, "not until you understand what you tried to take from him." He leaned forward. "When you threw that wine, you weren't attacking his clothes. You were attacking his worth." The wife closed her eyes, tears slipping down. Maria spoke again, gentler but unyielding. "You put him in the lowest position. Now look around." The wife slowly raised her head, and reality shattered around her. Every server stood united. Every guest silently judged her. Every executive avoided her eyes. Security refused to move at her command. The cameras captured her unraveling. And Elijah, the man she tried to degrade, sat in the seat she believed belonged only to people like her. Maria delivered the final blow. You wanted the world to see you above him, but all you did was reveal that in character, you were beneath him. The wife covered her face with shaking hands. A woman once feared, now undone by her own actions. And the reversal was complete. A strange stillness settled over the ballroom, the kind that arrives right before a storm finally breaks. Elijah sat in the sponsor's chair, composed, unreadable, elegant even in a wine-stained suit. The wife trembled opposite him, clutching tissues someone had handed her but never daring to use them. Maria took one step forward. "Before anything continues," she said, "everyone here deserves to know exactly who was insulted tonight." The guests leaned in, phones lifted higher, the cameras zoomed, the wife stiffened. No, this isn't necessary," she whispered. But Maria ignored her. "Elijah Grant," she began, "is not just a guest, not just a sponsor, not just a donor." She faced the crowd. "He is one of the founders of the Global Children's Literacy Initiative." A wave of murmurs. Recognition spread across several tables. Some had donated to that very charity without knowing its creators. Maria continued, "His organization has built schools in 14 countries, distributed 2.3 million books to children who had none, and funded scholarships for thousands of students, including many who look like the staff members you humiliated tonight." The wife covered her mouth, breath shaking violently. "And that's not all," Maria said. James stepped in, voice steady but thunderous in its calm. "Elijah Grant was invited tonight as our keynote partner to announce a $10 million extension to the foundation's work." Gasps exploded. A few people actually stood. The wife's head dropped, hands trembling in her lap. Maria looked right at her. "And you tried to treat him like—" "What? An inconvenience? A target? Something to step on?" The wife shook her head frantically. I didn't know who he was." "That's exactly the problem," James cut in. "You believe kindness is earned by status. That respect is only owed to people with wealth or power." He pointed to the staff gathered behind the dessert table. "You didn't know any of them either, and you treated them worse." The wife's face collapsed into her hands. Her sobs grew louder. not out of regret, but because the carefully built facade of her world was falling apart. Maria turned to Elijah. "Would you like to say anything? The floor is yours." The room held its breath. Elijah looked around, at the crowd, at the young server who had spoken up, at the security guards who had confessed their truth, at the wife who had targeted him for no reason except cruelty. Then he stood. The entire ballroom rose with him. He took a moment before speaking, long enough that the silence itself became part of the message. "When she threw the wine," Elijah said softly, "I wasn't humiliated." He glanced down at the stain. "Clothes can be cleaned." A soft murmur of agreement rolled across the room, but what she tried to destroy wasn't fabric. He looked directly at the wife. "It was dignity." The wife sobbed harder. Elijah continued. "And the saddest part, it didn't have to be this way. All she had to do was speak to me like a human being." His voice grew heavier. "Respect is not a luxury. It's not a privilege. It's not something only certain people deserve." A pause. "It is the baseline of being human." The crowd erupted in quiet nods. "And as for who I am," Elijah said, turning back to the room, "it doesn't matter." He gestured toward the staff. "What matters is that anyone else she targeted tonight, they deserved better even more than I did." Maria let out a slow breath. Deeply moved, James stepped forward. "And that," he said, "is why everything changes now. Because people like her cannot continue behaving like this. Not in silence, not in darkness, not without consequences." The wife looked up, eyes swollen, terrified. "What? What consequences?" she whispered. James didn't answer. Not yet, but the air thickened with the promise of what was coming. For a moment, the ballroom existed in two worlds. One where soft music had played, champagne had clinked, and elite guests had mingled. And another, the world everyone stood in now, a courtroom without walls. The millionaire's wife sat hunched in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, trembling in a way that was no longer dramatic or performative. It was fear, real fear. Maria stepped forward again, this time not as a defender, but as a representative of the entire foundation. "Since you asked about consequences," she said calmly, "let's begin." The guests leaned in, phones steadied, security returned to neutral stances. The wife looked around desperately, as if searching for allies, for someone to rescue her, for her husband to magically appear, but he was nowhere in sight. And even if he had been, he would not have been able to stop what came next. Maria lifted her hand. "First," she said, "your conduct tonight violated the Foundation's code of ethics. 3 separate clauses." She ticked them off. Harassment of staff, harassment of guests, and obstruction of event security procedures. The wife swallowed hard. Maria continued. "You signed those clauses at check-in. They were not suggestions." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. James took over with measured precision. "Second, you verbally assaulted multiple employees. We now have witness accounts, plural, confirming past incidents." He gestured to the servers. "And tonight the world saw it live." The wife looked up sharply. What do you mean, live?" Maria pointed to the cameras. The live stream did not pause. Not once. The wife's blood ran cold. "And the comments?" James added softly. "They're not in your favor." A catering staff member stepped forward bravely. "We've reported her behavior 3 times, she said, but every report disappeared. Security nodded uncomfortably. "Management was told to keep donors happy," one guard admitted. "We were instructed to drop anything involving her." Maria's face hardened. "That ends tonight." She signaled to a woman near the stage, a Foundation lawyer who had been taking notes since the confrontation began. "Effective immediately," Maria announced. "You are banned from all Foundation events. Permanently." Gasps sliced through the ballroom. The wife's breath hitched. You can't do that, she said, voice cracking. My husband, he's a major donor. James cut her off. And that brings us to part 3. He opened a folder a staff member had handed him. It's cover stamped with the foundation's seal. We reviewed your husband's donation agreements earlier today. Every contribution is in his name alone, not yours. Maria folded her arms. And we do not punish people for their spouse's actions, but your behavior has consequences for you. The wife shook violently now. I didn't mean... That's the problem, Maria replied softly. You didn't think you needed to mean anything. You believed your status protected you. James stepped forward. But status is not a shield. Not anymore. The guests murmured in agreement. Then Maria delivered the part no one expected. 4th, we have decided to open a full internal review into event management and staff protection. The staff exchanged stunned looks. This foundation, Maria continued, will no longer allow employees to suffer in silence because of wealthy patrons abusing their access. The wife closed her eyes, collapsing inward. Her world, built on influence, connection, reputation, was being stripped layer by layer. James turned to Elijah. There is still one more decision to make, he said. And it belongs to you. The entire room pivoted toward Elijah. He looked almost surprised. He had not asked for this power. He had not come seeking revenge. But now, the foundation placed responsibility in his hands. Maria spoke gently. Elijah, do you wish to pursue a formal grievance? A report? A public statement? This choice is yours. The wife's eyes flew open. You wouldn't, she begged. Please, please. Her voice cracked into sobs. I'll lose everything. My reputation, my position, my life. Elijah stood slowly. The room stilled. His voice, quiet, steady, resonant, carried across the ballroom. I don't want to destroy anyone. He looked at her, not with hatred, but with truth. I just want this to stop happening. To anyone. He paused. And to make sure tonight leaves a mark on the world. Maria nodded. Then there will be a formal record, she said. But no retaliation beyond the policies already enacted. The wife collapsed into silent tears, and the room understood. The consequences were not just institutional. She had been exiled from the world she worshipped, by her own actions. By morning, the gala was no longer an event. It was a national headline. Clips from the live stream spread like wildfire across social media. Edited, reposted, slowed down, captioned, dissected. One video, the moment the wine splashed across Elijah's suit, hit 1 million views before sunrise. Another, the moment Maria revealed who Elijah truly was, hit 2 million. And the final clip, the wife shaking, collapsing into the chair as the room turned against her, became the most shared video of the week. Comment sections ignited. This is what accountability looks like. I've worked events for years. This behavior is real and common. Elijah handled that with more grace than any of us could. Ban her from every gala in the country. News anchors debated the incident. Talk shows analyzed the foundation's swift response. Articles broke down every second of the confrontation. The wife and her husband woke up to reporters outside their mansion. Microphones, cameras, drones. Questions shouted like arrows. Did your wife assault a charity donor? Do you condone her behavior toward staff? Is it true she has a history of abusing employees? Her husband, usually composed, looked shaken, exhausted, blindsided. When he finally gave a statement, it was brief. My wife's actions do not reflect the values of our family or our business. We are cooperating fully with the foundation. The subtext was clear. He was distancing himself, fast. Meanwhile, the foundation moved quickly. Maria held a press conference with staff standing behind her, servers, caterers, lighting technicians, security guards, an image that struck the nation. With every event, Maria announced, "We promised dignity and safety. We failed to enforce that promise, but we will not fail again." New policies rolled out within 24 hours. Body cameras for security. A zero-tolerance harassment clause with automatic bans. Anonymous staff protection reporting. Mandatory ethics training for all high-tier donors. Public posting of disciplinary actions. Other major organizations applauded the move. Some even copied it. Journalists called it the Elijah Protocol. The reform sparked by one night of courage, and through all of it, Elijah stayed silent. No interviews. No statements. No attention-seeking. When reporters tried to reach him, he answered only once. "I don't need to be the story. I just hope the right people became the story." But the internet wouldn't let it go. Elijah became a symbol overnight, a reminder that dignity could stand upright against entitlement, a reminder that power meant nothing without humanity. Meanwhile, for the millionaire's wife, the isolation cut deeper by the hour. Friends unfollowed her publicly. Sponsors removed her from boards. Clubs suspended her membership. Her business partners released statements condemning her behavior. Her name, once a ticket into elite circles, now shut doors faster than they could close, and every headline repeated the same brutal phrase: "Gala wife permanently banned after humiliating donor." Her kingdom had fallen. But the world? It was moving forward without her. The fallout did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like an avalanche. Slow at first, then unstoppable, crushing everything in its path. For the millionaire's wife, the first crack was subtle. A phone call that went unanswered. A text marked seen but never replied to. A lunch invitation suddenly postponed indefinitely. She tried to rationalize it. People were busy. The news cycle would move on. This would blow over. But it didn't. It grew. By the end of the first week, she realized the truth. This wasn't a scandal. This was a reckoning. The social freefall her inner circle, the women she believed were loyal, lifelong friends, distanced themselves with the precision of surgeons removing diseased tissue. Group chats continued without her. Events she once hosted were now attended by others. Her presence was quietly removed from photo albums on social media. One former friend, unaware her microphone was still live during a live stream, said, "She always thought she was above everyone. This is karma." Clips of that sentence spread instantly. The wife watched them alone in her bedroom, hands gripping the blanket, teeth clenching so tightly her jaw ached. The humiliation was no longer contained. It was global. The Foundation's actions become industry standard. By week 2, the Elijah Protocol had been adopted by 4 major philanthropic networks. Every board meeting across elite charity circles echoed with the same sentiment. We cannot allow another incident like the Grant Gala. Behind closed doors, executives spoke bluntly. She is radioactive. Anyone associated with her risks reputational collapse. Remove her name, immediately. Her name vanished from donor walls, from annual newsletters, from brochures, from websites. It was as if she had never existed at all. Her husband's shift. Her husband, once her shield, her protector, her public defender, became eerily quiet. At first, he had stood beside her with stiff posture and trained smiles. But as more evidence emerged, staff testimonies, internal reports, emails leaked from event management, the weight of her behavior grew too heavy to ignore. One evening, after another barrage of reporters outside the gate, he finally said, "You've put my entire business at risk." She stared at him, stunned. "Your business? What about me? What about us?" He didn't meet her eyes. This isn't about marriage right now. This is about damage control. And you've done damage. The words hit her harder than any headline. Damage. He had used the word twice. She felt something break inside her, something she didn't know how to fix. The legal threads. Unravel attorneys began contacting the foundation, asking for records, because harassment, when documented, witnessed, and broadcast live, carries consequences deeper than social shame. 2 servers filed official complaints. Security filed an ethics report. A staff union representative released a statement calling the incident an unmasking of systemic abuse by privileged patrons. Employment lawyers weighed in on national television. And soon, her own legal team advised her to prepare for possible civil action. She panicked. "I didn't touch anyone. I didn't hurt anyone." But her voice wavered, because deep down she knew she had, not with fists, but with power, with entitlement, with a lifetime of believing she could treat people as props in her performance of wealth. One email leaked by a former staff member contained the line, "Make sure she gets the server she likes. She enjoys making them nervous." That sentence alone sparked an entire movement online. The corporate aftershocks her husband's board of directors demanded answers. The company's stock dipped for 3 days straight after the scandal hit mainstream news. Investors weren't emotional about it. They were clinical. They spoke in numbers. Public trust down. Brand image compromised. Stakeholder relationships damaged. One analyst on CNBC said bluntly, "His wife's actions have created measurable financial instability." Her husband was forced to release a public statement. "My wife was not representing our company. Her behavior does not reflect our values." He didn't consult her before releasing it. He didn't prepare her. She saw it for the first time on television, like everyone else. She cried so hard she couldn't breathe. The worst consequence, isolation. But the deepest wound wasn't financial, or legal, or reputational. It was emotional, because as the world judged her, the walls of her home grew colder. Her husband stayed late at work. Calls with lawyers filled their living room. He slept in his study to avoid the cameras outside the bedroom windows. Weeks passed without a real conversation. One night she approached him, voice soft, trembling. "Do you hate me?" He didn't answer immediately. He just sighed. A long, exhausted sigh from a man whose world had been shaken. "I don't hate you," he said. A pause. "I just don't recognize you." She broke, collapsed into the rug, sobbed until her throat was raw, begged him to sit beside her. He didn't. He walked past her, closed the study door, and locked it. She lay on the floor alone, realizing the truth. For years, she had built a castle of privilege and believed she was untouchable inside it. But she had forgotten that castles collapse from the inside long before the world sees the crumble. And now, her kingdom was rubble. 1 month after the gala, the millionaire's wife sat across from a long, polished conference table in a private arbitration chamber, a room designed for silent decisions and irreversible consequences. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her lawyer whispered instructions she couldn't absorb. Every breath felt heavy, like the air itself judged her. Across the table sat representatives from the foundation. 2 attorneys, Maria, a union advocate for the catering staff. A senior member of the philanthropic ethics board. They weren't emotional. They weren't cruel. They were resolute. A screen displayed a slide titled, "Formal Findings of Misconduct Below," in cold, neutral text, "Harassment of employees. Harassment of a donor. Repeated pattern of abusive conduct. violation of the code of ethics, attempted misuse of security personnel, public defamation of a foundation partner, conduct damaging to charitable operations. The wife couldn't. Look at it. Her throat locked with each bullet point. Maria folded her hands gently. Do you have anything you'd like to say? The lawyer nudged her. This was her chance. Her final moment to speak. Her lip quivered. I made mistakes, she whispered. A tear slid down her cheek. But I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. The union advocate raised an eyebrow. You threw a plate at a dishwasher last year. The wife winced. I wasn't myself. You were very much yourself, Maria replied softly. And that is exactly why we are here. The silence that followed felt like judgment carved in stone. Then the verdict came. The Foundation's chief attorney read it with the finality of a closing door. The board has unanimously decided to uphold your permanent ban from all Foundation events. Additionally, we will be issuing a public statement regarding our actions and policies. Her heart pounded. But my reputation, my family, my husband's company, we are not responsible for the reputation you built, Maria said, only for the dignity of those you harmed. The gavel-like tap of a pen sealed the decision. It was done. The wife broke down, quiet, shaking, defeated. For the first time, the consequences were real, and there was no undoing them. 1 year later, soft breeze drifted across the courtyard of the new community center. A sleek open space filled with children running, laughing, painting, reading. A large sign above the entrance read, "The Grant Foundation." Learning Haven parents chatted on benches. Volunteers carried boxes of books. Local news filmed the grand opening. In the center of it all stood Elijah, smiling warmly at a group of teenagers, who were proudly giving him a tour of their new computer lab. His wine-stained suit from that night, framed behind glass in the lobby display, not as a symbol of humiliation, but as a symbol of resilience. A plaque beside it read, "Dignity can't be spilled." At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Maria spoke first. Elijah took a moment of cruelty, she said, and turned it into a movement of compassion. The crowd applauded. James stepped up next. Last year, he said, we witnessed a man respond to hate with grace, and that grace became policy. It became change. It became protection for workers who had none. Then it was Elijah's turn. He walked to the microphone slowly, greeting people with nods, calm and humbly confident. When he spoke, his voice carried a warmth the cameras captured beautifully. 1 year ago, I was humiliated publicly, but humiliation wasn't the point. Transformation was. The crowd listened intently. People asked why I didn't press charges, why I didn't destroy the woman who tried to destroy my dignity. He paused, long enough that the courtyard stilled, because punishment doesn't teach, but consequences do. Phones recorded. Children leaned in. Reporters scribbled. A year later, he continued, the foundation changed its policies. Other organizations adopted them. Workers are safer. Respect is non-negotiable now. That is enough for me. Applause swelled like a rising tide. Tonight, Elijah said, I stand here not as a victim, but as a builder. From the back of the crowd, staff clapped louder than anyone. Servers, caterers, security personnel. They knew exactly why this moment mattered. Meanwhile, the wife far across town, in a modest suburban home far smaller than the mansion she once inhabited, the millionaire's wife sat alone at her dining table. No reporters, no invitations, no glamour, just silence, and the consequences of her past. Her husband had filed for separation 3 months earlier. Her social circle had evaporated. The charities she used to flaunt had blocked her email addresses. But something had changed inside her, too, for the first time in her life. She questioned herself. She watched the Learning Center's live coverage on her tablet, saw Elijah cutting the ribbon with smiling children, saw the framed suit behind glass, heard the applause, and she cried. Not out of pity for herself, but out of recognition. Recognition of the harm she had caused. Recognition of the life she had wasted on vanity and cruelty. Recognition of the emptiness behind her old status. She whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry." No cameras to witness it, no crowd to validate it, no redemption arc, just a woman, finally seeing herself clearly. Back at the center. The ceremony ended with children rushing to explore the new rooms, reading corners, art studios, a small auditorium. A mental health room funded entirely by Elijah, Maria approached him quietly. "You know," she said, "you could have chosen revenge." Elijah smiled softly. "I chose legacy." James clapped a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You changed the world more in one night than some people do in a lifetime." Elijah looked around at the space. Hundreds of lives that would grow here. "The world changed me too," he replied, "and sometimes people need to fall apart so something better can rise." A young girl tugged at Elijah's sleeve. "Mr. Grant, can you show us how to use the new tablets?" Elijah knelt. "Of course. That's why I'm here." Maria and James watched with pride. Because in that simple moment, kneeling next to a child eager to learn, Elijah wasn't a symbol or a headline or a victim. He was exactly who he always had been, a man who believed in giving people a chance, even those who had not given him one. As the sun dipped behind the new center, Maria spoke quietly to a waiting reporter. What happened a year ago wasn't about race, class, or wealth. It was about humanity and the courage to defend it. The reporter nodded. "So what should viewers take away from Elijah's story?" Maria smiled. "That respect is the one currency every person deserves, no matter what they wear, where they work, or how they look." Lights faded. Children's laughter echoed across the courtyard. And for anyone watching the story unfold online, a final message appeared on screen. True change starts with a single act of dignity. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, humanity, and redemption. Your engagement helps us bring these messages to the world. Share this video so others can feel the impact too.